Yes. Oh my. Yeah. So cool.
And then we can get up and on the ground, it's like 90 there. What's such a lot of beautiful things in the fun map.
Yeah.
As you're trying to, that thing is not actually connected. Right? So this one is still, these two things are still working. So that'll be working for you then. And at some point, since I already started the recording, and at some point, you're familiar with Zoom, how to share your screens. Yeah. So that's your presentation there. I think. There you go. And then, sorry, I did not need to do that. That's your presentation, but now I'm not sure if, we should now, should we go to share screen? I'm sorry, this is not the most professional approach. So we won't do that. That's correct? That's correct.
Yeah.
All right. You everything. Oh, I guess I'll be the person who's introduced. Greg Aylsworth from visiting from Harvest area with family vacation at Cordell. To drop in and say and visit with people and talk about his work with the Park Service. This is a collateral duty that he's involved with working with branding and design. We want design system improvements over the long haul. I should have talked about yourself.
Yeah, I can certainly do that. So hello to everybody here. Hello to everybody on the call. Just let me try and enlarge this. So yeah, I'm Greg Aylsworth. I am actually on detail. So it's been collateral until recently. It's been turned into a detail as National Park Service Brand and Visual Identity Manager. So it's actually a position that doesn't exist in the National Park Service currently, but is desperately needed, in my opinion, because that's the world I come from. I started with the Park Service in 2017 as a term exhibit designer. My true skill set is with brand management and licensing, things like that. And so very quickly, I was able to jump into some collateral assignments, and it turned into this thing that hopefully is generating some steam. And Jay has been involved in a lot of these conversations based on a program we instituted about, I guess it's been a year and a half ago now. We'll talk about that a little bit later, our brand ambassador program. So I actually lived up here from 2005 to 2006. I worked at the Jackson Laboratory for a year in their communications office. Thought that my wife would be able to land a teaching position for her major up here, and that never came to be. So we ended up leaving almost as quickly as we were up here. But anyway, we came back up here in 2018 married, and haven't been back since. This is our first time back, so excited to be back. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the brand and the visual identity, some things that have happened over the years that have led to where we are today. And if that sounds good, I'm happy to answer questions on anything, though. I know there are probably some co-branding and partnership questions, maybe from the folks on the line. There's a lot of murky guidance there, and so we're trying to clean that up as well. So it's full circle. You got those screens, right? Is that it? There you go. All right.
Would it help to turn that light off? It's right on the, which one of the one that is? The TV one. I'll hit every button and not get the right one. There you go.
Okay, can you minimize that too? I'll at least do this. Okay. I do have a little vacation train, so it's a little more scripted than usual, but we'll get into it. So yeah, one of the most recognizable elements of the National Park Service identity system is the park ranger in uniform, right? But you're come to instantly recognize the flat hat, the badge, and the arrowhead patch, and so other core building blocks of this identity system are the trademark itself. Two distinct moments in architectural advancement. Ultimately, advancements in publication design, as well as cartographic symbols and maps and signs. So with that as our baseline, we can travel back in time and see why it's all pretty fascinating. So it all began with the US Army, right? First hats and uniforms to grace national parks were worn by soldiers who helped manage the sites in the early years. The Army was called to serve in 1886 when it was deemed that the civilian administration at Yellowstone was not adequately protecting the park from vandals. So as you can see here, by 1903, they were actually acting as guides too. That relationship understandably then influenced what became today's ranger uniform. So early on, the only requirement was that all rangers within a given park were uniformed alike. So rangers continually tried to convince leadership that they needed something a little more, something sort of to create an identity, similar to what the Forest Service had actually done with its uniform components. So this explains why the 1910 US Army uniform on the left became the model for the first uniform for National Park Rangers in 1911, seen to the right. So the tactic was to distinguish by incorporating, oh, that's me. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Bring things such as a noticeable flat brimmed hat, and this worked. The flat hat has become synonymous with the National Park Service. So we can talk about the hat actually a little bit. Precursor to the stiff brim hat was this alpine style seen in this drawing submitted by Sigmund Eisner. So this particular hat on the left is similar to what Rangers wear now, except that what is called a Montana peach. It's also called a lemon squeezer. And then here we see a comparison between the higher peaked hat and then the current Stetson hat on the right. So both are considered campaign hats because their crowns are pinched in four corners. So this Stetson style felt hat evolved from John B. Stetson's first Boss of the Plains, which he marketed in 1863. So that offering has long been known as the Ranger hat, no doubt from being used previously by Texas Rangers and reinforced by National Park Service use. So the current style hat became a formal part of the uniform in 1920, and the official color is Belgium Belly, which complemented the newly established uniform colors of green and gray. So we got to talk about this. So that flat hat is responsible for a common misconception. Smokey Bear is not a symbol of the National Park Service. He does wear a flat hat, but he belongs to our brothers and sisters at the US Force. So, but the mistake is kind of understandable because the agencies have a shared history. They were previously aligned. The parks and forest reserves separated in 1905, with each eventually becoming their own bureau. So prior to the establishment of the National Park Service in 1916, some park brochures were created by the US Army. These are not them. As you might expect, those focused on wayfinding and rules, but then enter the railroad companies that brought visitors to the parks. So they began offering more colorful publications like these. Now visitors could learn more about parks as well as find their way around. And then in 1920, when in the 20s, as the use of the automobile grew, the Park Service recognized the need for maps. So they began producing visitor publications too, and their brochures included road maps and other detailed wayfinding information, as well as site-specific interpretation. So at this point, in terms of a visual identity, we start to see the appearance of the uniform and brochures as a way to market the Park Service to visitors, but what about an actual logo? So this is an uncredited mystery. This first appeared around the time the National Park Service was established, featuring a sequoia cone. It was used sporadically until the mid-20th century, but never formally recognized as the agency's logo. Likewise, Western parks had been using a rustic architectural style that is sometimes called parkitecture. The superintendent's residence at Crater Lake on the right is in this style. The entrance station and left at Mount Rainier is another example. But it was a service-wide push in the Great Depression of the 1930s that made this architectural style part of National Park Service identity. So using FDR's New Deal and civilian conservation corps, parks across the country were building entrance stations and lodging and visitor centers and other infrastructure in this architecture style. So this work, which is officially called NPS Rustic, is largely the legacy of architect Herbert Mayer. So he worked as a consultant to the National Park Service during this period and later as an employee, and he's going to play an important role a bit later on. Despite an appeal that endures today, the rustic style of architecture was rapidly abandoned after World War II. So back to the uniform. In the 1930s and 1940s, we have the appearance of some classic women's uniforms that featured fatigue jackets paired with skirts and garrison style caps. We see sketches here as well as pictures of guys at Carlsbad Caverns in 1937. The first official women's uniform was authorized 10 years after that. So there's a lot of new scholarship actually going into the women's uniform. Nancy Russell, who is the NPF historian that works at Harper's Ferry Center, she's filling in a lot of gaps and debunking a lot of myths about the women's uniform from over the years. And hopefully that leads to a push with this new uniform committee and mixed uniform effort to, you know, get women the components that they need. I'm not sure how it's 2023 and there's still a lot of problems with all that, but you know, we'll see.
get the go-go boots back there. That's all we want.
So one of the modifications made to the flat hat design in 1938 was adding 3 ventilation holes on each side, and that's still present today in that style of hat. So let's talk about signs a little bit. So this manual from the 1940s is the earliest we've been able to track down, although we know that NPS was using signs and sign systems as early as 1926, but it was never formalized. It actually never became an actual office until 2001. And of course, publications. Our publications presence continued to grow at this time as well. So here we have the Shenandoah National Park brochure from 1941. And if you look at the logo, it's the Department of the Interior. So the Park Service is 24 years old at this point, still doesn't have a specific trademark for itself like other government agencies and bureaus had. So when people began flocking to national parks after World War II, it was clear Park Service needed a consistent identity. So in 1949, there was a contest. So NPS landscape architect Dudley Bayless won $50 in a service-wide competition for this design using NPS as a mountain range.
That is very solid.
Yeah, I guess that's worth $50. But this never went into service because shortly after the competition ended, National Park Service historian Aubrey Nation casually discussed this winning logo, the previous winning logo with the director, Newton Drury, and said, you know, we need something that expresses our primary function, like an arrowhead or a tree or a buffalo. So check. So he provided this sketch of an elongated arrowhead and pine tree along with a note that said, this may be the germ of an idea for an NPS emblem. A good artist may do something with it. And a good artist did do something with it. So in 1951, National Park Service Director Conrad Worth turned this concept over to Herbert Mayer. So the architect who made parkitecture and identity for the parks, he was now assistant director of the Pacific West region. He was previously a contractor and was hired on staff. So he and his staff brought Nation's design to life. It was formally authorized by Secretary of the Interior, Oscar L. Chapman, on July 20th, 1951, placed into service in 1952, and then slightly revised in 1954 here to the right, and you still see some of these across the landscape today. So what do all the components mean? And although it's never officially been spelled out, we've been stitching together some letters back and forth to some managers. It's never been identified, but long assumed that the logo's elements have consistently been recognized as symbolizing the many facets of the national park system. So the sequoia tree and bison for vegetation and wildlife, mountains and water for scenery and recreation, and then the arrowhead shape itself for history and archaeology. So the arrowhead first appeared in 1952 as a plaque at a National Park Service conference and in the brochure for Oregon Caves National Monument. So it began to be used as a patch on the uniform in 1955 and became mandatory soon thereafter. And then finally, in March 1962, it was officially designated as the symbol for the National Park Service. So it was registered with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office on February 9th, 1965, and then later given additional protection under the Trademark Act. So visitors began seeing the arrowhead at this time on signs welcoming them to parks. Sometimes like this, also use classic rustic elements such as massive timbers and native stone. We still see that across the service today. Let's go to maps real quick. So National Park Service maps have oriented visitors for more than a century. So this map from 1957 of Yellowstone depicts a clear visual hierarchy of roads, points of interest, and physical features. It has this monochromatic hand-drawn shaded relief, which softly highlights the park's typography. But we'll get back to maps in a little bit, back to the uniform, women's uniform in particular. So fashion influenced the uniform in the 1960s. So there was this airline stewardess style of dress. Flat hat was still worn by male NPS employees. It had clearly taken hold, and the arrowhead was becoming more and more a reality on publications, maps, and then signs were also growing to be a bigger part of the conversation. But the rustic architectural style, which spanned over half a century, took a shift toward the modern. So the second period of intense service-wide construction began in 1955 to lead up to the service's 50th anniversary in 1966. So this is the era known as Mission 66. During this era, more than $1 billion was dedicated to constructing 100 new visitor centers and thousands of administrative and service buildings, restrooms, and employee housing units. The period also saw a 40% increase in the number of parks. So the style of the new architecture contrasted sharply with the rustic look that dominated the previous construction push in the 1930s. So these new buildings, modern in form and finish, used by the Civilian Conservation Corps. Here we see Everglades, Shark Valley Observation Tower on the left, and then the Grand Teton Visitor Center and park headquarters on the right. NPS began implementing more comprehensive sign regulations during this time to meet new requirements of the Department of Transportation. So a more coordinated and robust presence, which was another great step forward for National Park Service identity. Prior to the establishment of the actual sign program, parks could choose from a group of fonts depending on the resource itself. So one category was suggested for general use in parks, parkways, monuments, recreation areas, having natural or scenic importance, and then other typefaces were reserved for military parks and battlefields, while still others were more appropriate for historic sites. So this is modified Gothic alphabet number 3 that we're looking here. And that was frequently used in early signs. It was digitized into the typeface Shenandoah, and it closely resembles that WPA style lettering of certain classic Park Service posters. And you can still see it today. Handful of parks across the service use it, and not surprisingly, this is from Shenandoah National Park. So, you know, the identity's heading places at this time, right? If we go back to our original baseline, we've got uniform components, signs, distinct architectural elements, and actual federal service mark, maps and symbols, informational interpretive publications, and then the Park Service turned 50. So hold on to your flat hats. Has anyone seen this? So this was influenced by the Mission 66 era of modern architecture. NPS unveiled a minimalist logo for an exhibit called Parkscape to celebrate the agency's 50th anniversary. So it was originally intended only for that exhibition, but Park Service Director George B. Hartzog expanded the effort and pushed an initiative called Parkscape USA. So this included a plan to upgrade and modernize the image of the National Park Service. So there was a memo that went around January 3rd, 1967, where he announced Parkscape USA consists of 3 basic elements: a program, a name, and a symbol.
He must
So-
have been a Trekkie.
We're gonna get to this.
Sorry for interrupting.
No.
So obvious.
Designed by Chernoff and Geismar Associates, so that's the firm that brought you other memorable trademarks, well, I won't say other, but and the NBC Peacock, the PBS heads, you've seen the National Aquarium logo, so that they're a renowned brand and identity design firm. So the logo had 3 triangles, which represented mountains and trees, encasing 3 circles that were meant to symbolize conservation. So it was tied to a similar design actually for the Department of the Interior. There were 2 new marks that were unveiled. And these were intended to phase out the NPS arrowhead and the DOI buffalo seal outright by June 1st, 1969. So recall that the final registration of the arrowhead just happened in February 1965. So we finally ended up with this mark, and then very quickly it was supposed to be on the way out the door. So illustrations show how the new logo would look on uniform caps and parked vehicles. It was also on a U.S. Postal Service stamp commemorating the Park Service's 50th anniversary that did go into production. The logo also made its appearance on individual park promotional pieces like these posters leading up to the intended 1969 formal launch. And then here's the complimentary DOI mark. So this featured a stylized pair of hands holding a circle, which was the sun, over 2 large triangles, which were mountains, which in turn were placed over 9 smaller triangles that were meant to symbolize water. So the NPS publications chief at the time, Vince Gleason, had suggested the hands to symbolize that the nation's natural resources were in good hands. So what became known as the triangles and cannonballs design was rejected. Rejected by employees in the field with criticism that included rangers would look like Trekkie.
Unicorns probably more comfortable.
The Department of the Interior mark was met with equal disappointment, being described as a gosh awful mod monstrosity. So this caused Interior Secretary Walter Hickel to promptly stop its implementation. So there are things out there with the posters. I think there are badges of some sort that did actually go into production. I think an actual metal badge and then some cloth ones as well. We have them in the history collection, but I don't know beyond that where they are, how many of them actually went out into the world. So in the 1970s, the National Park Service again turned to a renowned designer when Vince Gleason invited Massimo Vignelli to bring a fresh, identifiable look to park brochures. So he was already well known for streamlining mid-century furnishings that he was designing and simplified graphics for complicated systems such as the New York City subway. So for the Park Service, he created a unigrid system that is still in use today. He established standard templates to economize production and reduce paper waste while improving typography, design, and mapping. So this strong systematic approach presents a strong visual identity without losing each park's distinctive qualities. So Vignelli also introduced the black band or overbar. And here we see early unigrids from 1970s at the top, transitioning into those of the 1980s, which feature art or photographs and include the arrowhead. Inside the brochures, the map style is evolving as well. We see brighter colors, standardized typography, and symbology. So everything's kind of moving along. Here we go.
Here they are.
So the early 1970s also brought changes to the women's uniform, like beige outfits with scarves and the option to wear fashionable boots. So the way the story goes, those were not part of the uniform. I believe this.
One on the far right looks like Harry.
We decided to wear those this day, and this is the photograph that, you know, goes down in history, but they were technically never supposed to be part of the uniform. The volunteers were these sun orange pop-ons, that was what they were called. They were available from 1970 through 1974. and fit right into an era that featured optimism and bright colors. So sign standards took another leap forward at this time. So in 1975, Chairman and Geismar also created new standards that introduced brown as the signature NPS sign color and Clarendon as the standard typeface. And this firm also developed a set of pictographs for the National Park Service that were the basis for the symbols we have today. The ones we have now are a sort of a compilation between us and the Army Corps of Engineers, and PS worked together with them to create what we have today. And these are some of the actual slides from the camera-ready park from back in the day. 1980s were a time of transition for wayside exhibits as well. We didn't really talk too much about those, but and I guess I don't need to educate you all on what a wayside is, but obviously it's the official Park Service name for the information structures dotting the landscape at your favorite sites. So we like to call them little metal and ink rangers, readily at hand, offering interpretation and information to those who seek it. They're sort of, if you stumble upon them, that's great. The intention is for them to provide interpretation when nobody else can. So now is their time to join signs and brochures as bearers of the NPS identity. So having seen how Vignelli's Unigrid had transformed park brochures, designers at Harpers Ferry Center adapted the system for waysides. So we added a black band and developed a grid system to design the content, and the new standards visually connected waysides with brochures, further cementing the NPS identity for the public. So the new design also visually linked the two most common used types of waysides, the low profile, which gives the site-specific interpretation about a feature that you can readily see, and then the upright, which typically informs visitors about an area or a trail. And HFC has continually helped evolve wayside exhibit design and technology ever since. NPS maps had been developing their own identity elements since the 70s. And so in addition to the now familiar pictographs, this 1987 map shows two new defining characteristics: the green fill and the boundary ribbon that distinguish the park from neighboring federal lands. And then what about that black border we see around the map? So that was an experiment using X and Y axes like road maps. It went away, but this type of map overall would go largely unchanged for the next 30 years. So back to signs. In 1987, NPS Director William Penn Mott asked the Denver Service Center to conduct a study evaluating signs in the national parks. So they found a number of variations and recommended NPS have a central sign team to aid parks in design and procurement and installation and evaluation of signs. So Mott supported it, saying, let us not revolutionize the National Park Service sign system, but rather evolutionize it to a higher standard and quality. But at that time, NPS decided to train people in the field to manage signs instead of creating that central sign team or sign program. So this made sense because there were advancements in desktop technology at the time and production. And so many people were dabbling with design, and so it made sense to reach back out to the parks to fill this void. But however, the need for a central sign team still remains. So that brings us to late 1990s, early 2000s. So the next thing we have is communicating the National Park Service mission, also known as the Message Project. So this established the National Sign Program. There's a director's order, 52 series of director's orders. There are 4 of them, A, B, C, and D. C established the sign program. The others deal with brand management. Very little secret, 2 of them were never signed. So that's why we're struggling yet today, over 20 years later, with a lot of this. But anyway, it established the sign program as part of a clear communication strategy, and it provided the field with a flood of new tools that accommodated advancements in print, web, and sign technology. And this also led to clear management of the arrowhead itself and put Harpers Ferry Center squarely in the lead of the National Park Service graphic design standards. So back to the trademark itself. As part of the Message Project, the National Park Service selected a Washington, D.C. firm, Dennis Konecka Design Group, to take a look and tasked them with rebuilding the arrowhead. So they had 2 major challenges. The arrowhead's complex composition made it difficult to reproduce in small sizes and various media. And it was not clear to some observers that it was actually meant to be an arrowhead. So this new one was formally released to the field in 2001. And so visual communicators now had art that fit with new technology. And then the message project also provided that first generation of digital templates and an array of commonly produced products for those in the field. Each publication template came with all the elements of the new National Park Service graphic design standards in place. And then samples for each product type were made available to show effective use of the grids and typography. Project's manual also provided detailed information for using the black band and how type was to interact with the arrowhead. And so communicators were asked to think of the black band as part of the identity that kind of holds all the other graphic elements together. Harper Spray Center also developed a hands-on training program, which no longer exists, to show park employees how to revise their publications, using the message project, and then to keep up with that routine maintenance. So this effort directly trained hundreds of people over 2 decades, and they in turn then trained more people themselves. So this program ended when budgets cut training and travel, and HFC continues to support field staff through online updated templates and technical advice and discussions. But it is a shame that this training no longer exists. So we are working on trying to find a way to make some sort of training available again. As for signs, some parks continue to follow their own standards using a range of typefaces. This and the fact that state and local governments began using brown to designate parks and similar attractions meant that by the 1990s, National Park Service signs had lost some of the brand differentiation that they had started with. So to remedy this, in conjunction with the Message Project, NPS hired Meeker and Associates to create comprehensive sign standards. So using Yosemite as a pilot project, Meeker created standard manuals for 3 categories of signs: park and facility identity, motorist guidance, and visitor information. So the signs you see here are part of that 3rd category, which includes signs related to regulations, interpretation, resource protection, general information, safety, and pedestrian wayfinding. A major part of this was also to develop new typographic standards, so we needed something to replace Clarendon. The new typeface needed to have a distinctive, more contemporary look and be easier to read. Meeker chose type designer James Montalbano for this task, so he created serif typeface that he named Rawlinson in honor of his father-in-law, who was ironically a colleague of Smokey Bear at the Forest Service. So eventually Rawlinson was paired with Fruger to give the NPS 2 distinctive and functional typefaces. And both were more legible than the previous typefaces. And I'll add, and we were having a conversation ahead of time, we are really looking to enhance these to include all native and tribal characters that are needed for all types of media. So we're still trying to work through that, but hopefully we will get that done soon. In 2014. So the sign program designers provide a range of services from complete master plans to advising on individual signs. That's still an older one, I guess. I need to update that picture, but so it included new park signs, standards that merged with new typographic standards and modern design, and then still the opportunity to use those local and native materials as well, at least for identity signs. And then in 2014, National Park Service and the National Park Foundation started planning for the service's 100th anniversary in 2016. So developed by Gray Advertising in New York, NPS Centennial logo at the left was created for use on Centennial related materials and also merchandise opportunities for partners and cooperating associations. And then it was paired with the Find Your Park campaign logo, and then these 2 marks were applied to a variety of materials during that time. During this process, the National Park Foundation rebranded itself. So they shifted from their hat, mountain, stream logo to this new mark, and that's how we ended up with this other thing. Gray advertising also created a complementary NPS mark that was used for specific Centennial applications, but its use beyond the Centennial was left wide open, and so nobody really understood what to do with it. It was perhaps for licensing or partner recognition. The partnerships office, the brand team is still trying to figure out what to do with it, especially since the agreement to use it expired in 2017. So I'll leave it at that. Some of the most recent HFC advancements are in maps and waysides. So this is the 2018 Yellowstone map, created entirely from GIS data. So the shaded relief delineates meadows and forested areas derived from the National Land Cover data set to replicate the natural environment. They really have to push now to make sure that the resource itself influences the design, and it's not just solid or shaded colors. So the map's terrain was generalized from high resolution elevation data to closely resemble its hand-drawn predecessors. The map is also geo-referenced, which allows visitors to navigate the park using their mobile devices. NPS cartography continues to evolve with improvements in GIS technology and the availability of data while maintaining the artistic qualities of previous generations. As for waysides, Harpers Ferry Center recently designed a new ultra-low profile style for the United States Marine Corps War Memorial. So because these are much lower to the ground than more common waysides, they intrude less on this space. The request from the mall, from the park was, this is such a solemn site. We really don't want these things in the way, but we still need them. So this was the solution. So the new design unveiled in spring of 2019, perhaps, is visible and in place at the Marine Corps War Memorial.
Is the flat top wheelchair accessible? Is that?
It is, yeah, it is accessible. It has the correct height, and that this was an early picture because the cast of the statue is what goes on that table.
I see.
It wasn't ready yet. I guess it was coming from France, I think, is the contractor was getting it from. So yeah, so there's a a bronze replica of the statue itself. The flagpole in that statue is made of titanium, and it still is being bent by masters. So, as you all know, they will find it. Advancements are also being made in uniforms. So new embroidery methods have been able to patch to more closely resemble the actual arrowhead graphic, allowing for it to be replicated in a more accurate and visually pleasing manner. So this new design at the right, unveiled in spring 2020, allows for a truer arrowhead shape, better color contrasts, and we like to say a much happier bison. Although NPS has had a presence on the internet since the 1990s, the onset of social media has presented one of the widest reaching communications touch points ever created, right? So our presence on multiple platforms is also part of the identity, and so is our mobile app technology. And so that leaves us with some interesting questions still. So even with all these major accomplishments and hundreds of people trained to use the message project components, you may be surprised to learn that NPS has never had the resources to manage the brand effectively. So it continues to be a collateral duty for some, and trying to enforce quality control and best practices based on a director's order that was never signed is difficult. So what do we do about this, right? So we're currently trying to build on the successes of the message project and the training that came along with it. So we want to turn the visual language into, an actual dynamic brand, used service-wide and recognized internationally. I think internally we feel that it's been done well. Externally, the public probably doesn't know anything more than what we give them, so they think, okay, they assume this is what it's supposed to look like. But there are a lot of holes and gaps. So in 2018, Harpers Ferry Center coordinated with the Offices of Communications and Partnerships to launch an internal audit. of existing communications materials being used at the parks. So what have we discovered? So we sent a request to all Park Service units. It wasn't mandatory, unfortunately. I was pushing for that, but I guess that's a difficult task or ask. Still newish by Park Service years, so I'm still not understanding that, but you know, from this alone, we're getting a better understanding of the communications challenges facing park employees. So in addition to developing visitor programs and activities, many are being asked to develop publications and other communications pieces as well, but a significant number of the staff don't have the proper training, right? So we're trying to offer that in a few different ways. So the field staff can find updated templates on our website or SharePoint sites. And then we've also launched a brand ambassador program recently, which Jay is a part of. So this leverages the existing visual information specialist community across the service as champions of the brand. So we've tried to round up as many of the VISs that were executing the brand at a high level and knew the standards and guidelines, and we're making them available to other park sites that don't have visual information specialists. We got that cleared with the regional directors and with individual supervisors. Hey, X number of hours we're going to pull from Jay, and he can help out, you know, with these tasks that come in. And so it's starting slowly, but it's working. You know, we're trying to find a way to work within what we have to get more professional hands on some of these communications pieces. So the biggest group of stakeholders obviously is the people that work in the parks every day. So we're really actually actively listening, or at least I, you know, I know the culture seems to be the Washington office tells you what to do, and then that's not that healthy of a dynamic, it seems. So, you know, I don't know any other way. I don't know how to help Acadia without talking to Acadia, right? I mean, what do you struggle with every day? What about this system is not working for you? And so we're really trying to find a way to have those conversations to build a new brand identity system that works for all. So yeah, we're actively soliciting feedback from the field and listening. You know, you can't have award-winning, socially conscious, creative branding without being able to listen and understand and adapt. And that's really sort of what I'm trying to bring to the Park Service. You know, you look at all the great brands, Coca-Cola, things like that, you know, they've always been flexible. And there's a certain amount of inflexibility with the Park Service system that I think we need to take a look at. You know, those brands may have never broadcast that, right, or admitted it, but brands have to be flexible. And so it's more about what tells your narrative and your story than the rules you need to comply, right? So we're trying to shift that. You know, the National Park Service is a major brand, right? So we should act accordingly. That comes with the responsibility to do this stuff well. So in 2001, Ogilvy Public Relations identified the National Park Service as the largest, most comprehensive, most efficient media and communications company in America, making direct contact with over 285 million consumers every year. So that's more than Disney, that's more than Universal Studios, that's more than the National Football League. And today we reach over 327 million people. So I would say, yes, we are a major brand. However, if you look at the data that we collected from that survey, 73% of the people that are working on our most public communications touch points don't have the proper training to do so. So we've got to wrestle with that, right? So we've got terrific tools already, and these are all used to form a perception that actually ultimately comes to represent the brand. But a brand is not these tools alone, right? So we've got to realize that whatever the visitor feels when they engage with the resource, with you all, that's the brand. And so that can be positive or negative. We have to find a way to shape that. So the brand is what they say it is. So that's really what branding is. It's not about a product or one specific thing. It's that gut feeling that your visitor has about the organization. And so that can be scary, right? Like, what does our culture say about the National Park Service? That's all part of the brand. We have to we have to wrestle with that and think about that, because perception is nearly impossible to control, right? So what can we do? You know, is try to provide touch points for people to latch onto, these positive interactions, as many as we can with each visitor. So we're lucky that we have the power of place, right? That helps with what we're trying to sell, right? So, these touch points afford us a chance to endear ourselves and our brand to the public. And we've got to be flexible, agile, and careful with that, right? So, you know, we've got the stuff. How do we tell the stories though, through branding? How we inspire people to want to share these experiences can be aided by a well-crafted brand identity system, right? So we reinforce these emotions by creating another layer of connection through visuals and stories. So it's not just about diversity or controversy or transparency, it's about honesty. Okay, so what we're really trying to do is enable visitors to develop their own deep personal connection to our national parks that is far more powerful than memory alone. So former NPS Director Fran Manila said, "We are one organization with one mission. Each of us has a critical role to play in effectively communicating that mission to the public and extending to them an invitation to join us in our stewardship efforts." And so that's what we're trying to do with the brand. So places like Acadia, you know, it's to be able to do a better job of connecting people to the brand at every park unit and on an individual level as well, accounting for operational realities, programming narratives, and partner inclusion as well, you know. And once that registers internally, it'll start to be broadcast a little more externally, and then from there, you know, the possibilities are endless. And I think that's it. Yeah. So a lot of people, including Jay, have contributed to this information and presentation, but so that's a little snapshot of, you know, how things look the way they do today. And I will entertain any specific questions about any of it or what I can answer. You know, I only know so much, but I did a lot of research and I can try and tell you where we're trying to head with it all. It's really, it's critical to me that we hear from you all. I don't know, like I said, I don't know any other way forward than seeing what you do every day, getting in there and being able to react and try and provide solutions.
If you didn't have the red tape and protocols and policies, where would you want to be in 5 years as far as the NPS brand?
Yeah, I think internal support and an office that would actually manage it. I think we did a good job in 2018 of linking HFC, the comms office, and partnerships office as this collaborative thing, but that doesn't work ultimately because nobody's really making decisions, right? And there's some territorial things there that certainly predate me, a lot of it because of the centennial, just being honest here. I think it would be great to have something new that's part of the Washington office that is aside from those 3 offices or directorates or whatever it is that can just manage the brand. I think you would need an intellectual property sort of manager and then a brand manager and then whatever sort of team you could afford under that to link everything together, because there's great work being done in so many areas, but it's not connected to like a larger vision. And I think that's what's missing. So in 5 years, it would be great to have an individual or an office or a team that can help broadcast and educate and provide tools to make sure that that vision is aligned. And like I said, actually be more flexible. Like what I always tell people is, we want you to break the rules. We just want to teach you how to do it the right way. Like there's a difference between do whatever you want and a healthy evolution of the brand or a targeted campaign or whatever. And so I think in 5 years, if we had more of an actual team, if the director's order could be redrafted for 23 years later and it makes sense, I think that would be good.
Can decent reindeer be a part of our brand?
So I asked to be part of that new uniform committee that they just propped up, or maybe it always existed, it just was defunct, I don't know, but I was like. We gotta look at it from the engagement standpoint, like that's where I can add value is, hey, fit, form, function, you guys have gotta nail that, but let's look at it from what the visitors see, like what does that uniform mean? But we had the annual meeting a couple weeks ago and talked through a lot of that, and it seems like the contract that is currently in place, and I guess may have been in place for a long time with the same group that just keeps changing its name, maybe I have that wrong, but for whatever reason, it's difficult to like think outside of that, for, you know, I think that's sort of just a programming issue. But yes, that survey that went out, that the results are not in yet. I think they're gonna be ready end of August or maybe end of the calendar year. But yes, I think getting you what you need is what needs to happen, right? And for whatever reason, I don't know why that's getting tripped up. It could be sourcing, like everything has to be sourced responsibly, which I understand that, but I think there's a different way to go there. Personally, me, I would get rid of the contract altogether. I would look at a sponsorship model. I would look at, hey, let's have an agreement with Patagonia. We know that they
Yeah.
source stuff responsibly, right? And so let's do that instead, or any other businesses like that, where we can say, hey, let's turn this into a sponsorship model where, I mean, sure, they would love to say that they outfit the National
Well,
Park
they- I mean,
Service.
they have the pro deal that we can't use anymore, but
Yeah.
right, like they want our name.
Yeah.
On us.
And so the only stipulation there, I think, is their brand mark can't appear on any of our stuff. Sure, they would be fine with that, like that's, if that's the only sticking point, I'm sure it's more than that, but yeah, I think reimagining all of that is what needs to happen. Unfortunately, that's certainly not under my control, it's a totally different directorate and years of, you know, tradition, and that's what came up a lot at that annual meeting, where, wow, now this is what we do.
It has been better since I started,
Has it?
yes. But there's still like, the reindeer in particular.
Yeah, I think the comment was, yeah, the reindeer doesn't keep out the rain. Okay,
Shoes
that's
aren't great
a
either.
problem. And just the litany of things with the maternity components. so
That's, yeah,
horrible, yeah.
it's like publicly shaming women.
Yeah.
It's so uncomfortable, and either been pregnant, you've not heard.
Really?
It's so-
Yeah.
So fit of those things, I mean, yeah, pregnant or not, fit is not great on a lot of pieces.
So I've written a whole bunch of reports during my time in this detail, and I've pointed to some case studies of organizations out there that have made strides in their uniform, so Parks Canada, UK, New Zealand, even what Disney is permitting now, that's more sort of personal appearance and grooming standards and things like that, visible tattoo, like Disney has been notoriously strict on all of that, and they have relaxed all of that, and so that's all part of the conversation too. The Army, so the US Army has really taken great lengths to outfit the female soldier from the day they set foot into that program or whatever. It's like personally tailored, basically. They have, you know, and I don't know what you can and can't do in terms of personal and PII and all that, but like they do body image scanning and like they fit you with what fits and what is comfortable. So certain things that maybe we can't do that the Army can, but yeah, like why aren't we? I don't know how it's 2023 and stuff doesn't fit, like what, that's, I've never worn the uniform, I worn volunteer shirt, that's the only, 2010, had a volunteer gig at HSE, That's my experience, and just from the outside looking in, it's like, what is going on? It sounds horrible. Maybe that's something you guys can figure out, but,
Maybe everybody on the committee should be forced to wear polyester and wool uniform in an unheated building when they consider what their uniform standards ought to be.
yeah.
Or in 90 degrees and raining.
Yeah.
So Ken helped notice your polo shirt.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, how does stuff in the Arrowhead store relate to the official uniform? When it seems like non-uniform regional law so people have adopted their stuff as a uniform,
Yeah,
like a
it's,
non-uniform uniform.
it's like one of the strangest paradoxes, so. The Arrowhead store agreement dates to the 1970s apparently. And the genesis of it was a recent retiree had enough pull that they said, hey, I will still be able to show my support for the Park Service and be able to wear stuff with the arrowhead on it. And let's create this program. And so the agreement to this day still reads as it's for esprit de corps. It's not to be considered a uniform component. It's not to replace or be mistaken for anyone on active duty. And so I don't know how that is still the way it reads, because that, like, yes, this is from the Arrowhead store. I'm coming to speak to you all today. I would like to have something like a professional business, whatever casual you want to call it. And so everyone is doing that. Everyone is, if they're not getting it from the Arrowhead store, there's the Lands End Business Agreement, or people have relationships with local, you know, they just get it done. And so clearly there's a need.
I'm surprised that the Park Service hasn't picked up on that and created this casual or business, whatever it is, for people who, you know, thousands of people don't need a uniform, that work with the Park Service, that are in front of the public or colleagues that, like you're doing, you don't want to be identified.
Yeah, it's crazy. The fact that that's the agreement says, no, you cannot, I shouldn't be wearing this right now. Okay. But yeah, and so it sounds like in 2014, Harper's Ferry Center was tasked with creating a line of stuff. And it died, it got killed by somebody, I don't know who or why, so it's like, no, we're not.
So their arrowheads have to be updated as we update ours, or they can just use whatever arrowhead they've had.
The Arrowhead store? That's a good question, I think.
There's a quality check for that.
Yeah, it doesn't exist, so it was supposed, there's supposed to be maybe a quarterly check-in evaluation review. Sounds like that hasn't happened since 2005 or something like that. And I know, like, so I get the emails, right, and some of those things have the biggest violator, let's see if there's anything. No, so it's the white version of the arrow. There's an actual special build that you're supposed to use, but nobody knows about it because it's like buried in the sign programs system. It just has never been released for whatever reason, I guess, for other, so people just make a reverse of the black and white logo, and that's incorrect. So the bison ends up being transparent, or it just appears how it should. And so that's all over the Arrowhead store. And so
the last one,
yeah, exactly. And that, like, those green journals and the award folders, that's all, it's all technically the wrong Arrowhead. Same thing with the uniform program. I went through the catalog this past year, and the lifeguard gear has been wrong for 20 years. The work shirt, like that is a weird hybrid build of the Arrowhead that's technically not right on. Like, there's space between the meadow and the outer, that's not supposed, it's the wrong outer shape. That's been around for a significant amount of time as well. And so it's like, yeah, how do we sort of, not blaming anyone, but like, let's take this seriously and clean a little bit of this up, right? Can we do that?
I've seen a lot of backcountry rangers out west that, they just live out in the wilderness all summer. They'll just buy a gray REI sun hoodie and like just get an arrowhead and slap it on there and that's their uniform.
Yeah,
I'm like, I've definitely done that, like, I'll just get a green Patagonia jacket because it's a lot more packable. And that's it.
they're not providing any sort of alternative to get you what you need, yeah, I get that, you know, but that's what you gotta do.
Are these like concerns being brought up in like the annual review that you were just talking about?
Yeah, so and this is sort of where the chain of command falls apart. Like I said, I've written, I think 2 of my reports have been directly about the uniform as an engagement tool and also deficiencies in the program itself. And I don't know what happens to them after I hand them off to my supervisor and do they make it where they need to? I'm not sure. But the committee, so there were good conversations with that committee, but then again, at the end of the day, it's sort of out of the committee's hands because I guess, I don't remember who's who or what the correct titles are, but basically at the end of the day,